My dad died alone in a hospital room while most of the people he loved were at a Christmas party. 3 weeks prior, he had been on the job installing telephones, which required him to climb up a telephone pole. And in the climbing, he fell. He fell 14 feet, which wasn't deadly at the time, but he did end up in the hospital. But the doctors were confident that he'd be home by Christmas. Instead, a blood clot traveled up his leg and hit his heart, and he died. When my mom got the phone call, she became hysterical, justifiably so. And eventually her hysteria got to such an extreme that the police were called because no one knew what to deal with this woman flailing around, right? And so the police arrived, and one of them had the nerve to look her in the eye and say, "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" She looked him back in the eye and said, "It's Christmas, my husband just died, and I'm pregnant." And then she punched him right in the face. You can't tell the story of my father dying without telling the story of my birth. I was that baby that my mom was pregnant with. And this is how everyone found out that she was pregnant with me, including my father. My father didn't know. She had a card for him for Christmas that said, "Merry Christmas, we're pregnant." And this is tragic, obviously. But if you fast forward maybe 4 years, you find a house full of females, my 2 older sisters and I, and my mom, and we're making ends meet. My dad was the sole breadwinner, and when he died, he took that income with him. And so my mom did things like taking in sewing and ironing and babysitting, but it also means she had to get a little bit creative with her finances. And so when things would break at our house, she would try to fix them. My mom was not very mechanically inclined. And so she would hand those things off to us when she couldn't fix them herself. She figured if it wasn't going to get fixed, we might as well give it a go, right? Well, the gifts that my father gave us were, number one, the gifts of being a little more mechanically inclined than our mom. But also, he was a very mischievous guy, and he was very curious, and he passed that along to us, especially my middle sister, Bridget, who was pretty much a troublemaker, and also my idol. I followed her around wherever she went, and I did whatever she told me to do. He also left us a garage full of tools. He had been building our house that we lived in when he died. He'd also been kind of limping along 3 different cars that he was always working on, having one going and having the other 2 kind of waiting in the wings. And so we had all these tools, we had time, and we had these appliances that our mom was saying, "Give it a go." And so we did. We would open up toasters and see what was inside and see how the springs worked and see if we could see what was broken. The VCR, see if we could fix it. Most of the time we couldn't, but sometimes we could. And that was enough to make us feel confident that it was possible to fix anything that we opened. We also took those tools and did some creative things building. We went in our front yard. We wanted a tree house. Our mom's afraid of heights. And so we built a tree house, which was just basically a piece of plywood on some 2x4s in a tree. I remember cutting the 2x6 that we used for a swing using a handsaw. We moved from that house when I was 5, so it's pretty little. We also, very importantly, installed a cat elevator because we wanted our cat to be able to get up into the tree fort, and how else was she supposed to get up there? So we had the cat elevator, and we were very proud of it. And basically, these gifts of curiosity, mischievousness, it made us very confident little girls. And I didn't realize that that's what it was doing the whole time. But our failures and then sometimes our successes made us feel like we could kind of do anything. And so we did. And so what happens when you take that curiosity and you give it to an 8-year-old girl? So I run a nonprofit called Girls Build. And we have summer camps for girls and after-school programming. And during this program, we teach them to build. During our summer camps, we have 40 girls per week. And what that looks like is on the first day of camp, the girls arrive. And if you picture 40 little kids, 8 to 11 years old, you think it's going to be loud, right? Like they're all talking and they're getting excited. No, it is dead quiet. Because they show up to camp, we throw a hard hat on them, and then safety glasses, ear protection, tool belt, bucket, tools. And they're kind of looking at each other like, what did we get into? Fast forward 1 week, the last day of camp. Over the course of that week of camp, we've done 20 different building workshops with them. They've learned over 10 different building trades. And so you look at that Friday afternoon when they're leaving camp, and we invite their parents to join us. We have a big scavenger hunt at the end of camp. And so the girls are running around, all 40 of them, parents running around, and they're looking for these little tags that say, drill a screw in here, hammer a nail, do this, add up these fractions for us, whatever it might be. But my favorite station to watch is the chop saw. So a chop saw is about that big, about that tall, with a 10 to 12 inch blade on it. And girls who are over 10 at summer camp are allowed to use it. And so they walk up very confidently, parents in tow, and they read the little tag. They grab a 2x4, they grab their tape measure, they measure it, they mark a crow's foot, they get out their speed square, they mark a line, they drop it onto the table, push it up against the fence, and they put their hand on the trigger. And their parents are looking at them with their eyes bugged out, like, is my little girl really gonna do this? And a lot of times they say, are you sure you can do this? At which point, the camper eye roll is introduced. She looks at her parents and sighs and says, of course I can use a chop saw. Like they're idiots, right? Like this little girl who's only about this big is just totally fine. But she is, and so she puts her hand on the trigger, and she brings that blade down and she cuts the wood. And it's really cool to watch. And what you see from the beginning of that week to the end is confidence. They're curious, they learn about a bunch of different things, and they also fail. They mess up over the course of the week. I watched two little girls one time hammer one nail for 90 minutes. It never went in. But they were super proud of themselves, right? They were installing the trim. They were doing it. And so they see themselves, fail at a lot of things, and they realize that it's not the end of the world, right? And when they do that over and over again, they get a little more confident, and they think, like, if I can do this, maybe I can do a lot of things. And they do. And I have parents who write me afterward and say, you would not believe the change in her confidence after she's done with camp. You wouldn't believe the things that she's trying to do now at home after camp. And that's what we want. And so what happens if you take that curiosity and that confidence and you give it to a high school girl? So I taught high school for 2 years, high school construction actually, for 2 years. On my first day of class, I had one female student in the entirety of all of my classes. So I asked the boys to recruit more girls. I wanted more girls in my classes. And from that recruitment, we got 4 girls. So we had 5, which was great. And it was so interesting watching the girls versus the boys. If you've ever hung out with 17-year-old boys, they're the most confident group of human beings I think I've ever met in my entire life. They may not have ever heard of something before, but they will tell you, like, I got it, I know how to do that, I know how to do that, don't worry about it. And they'll go do it. But the thing that was interesting was the boys had been working toward a career in construction since they were this big. They had uncles and neighbors and whoever teaching them, this is what your goal is. This is where you can go with construction. And so they did. And the girls were walking to my classroom for the first time saying, what is this? Picking up a hammer for the very first time. And so they're 10 years behind. There's no way they can catch up. And that was driven home for me one day when one of my female students came in, and she said, Ms. Hughes, I want you to know, I would not have graduated high school if it wasn't for this class. And this light bulb went off for me. She wasn't saying, like, Ms. Hughes, you're the best teacher in the entire world. She was saying, this class is really cool. And I thought about the boys in my classes. And those boys were spending their days, they had like woods 3, then metals 3, and then automotive 3, and then construction. Like that's a pretty great schedule for your senior year. And so the boys were waking up in the mornings, and they're excited about what they're going to do for their day. They're going to start a project. They're going to finish a project. The other thing I saw them doing was coming to school and saying, Ms. Hughes, I was thinking all night about that problem we're having with XYZ. I think I figured out how to fix it. And then they go do it. They're excited about what they're learning at school. And when we don't let girls have that opportunity, we're robbing them of the opportunity to actually be excited at school and to graduate from school, right? To spend their days building things. They don't get to do that. And so what happens if you take that curiosity and that confidence and you give it to a girl graduating high school? So both of my sisters are dyslexic, and they struggled tremendously throughout high school. My oldest sister, Maria, didn't learn to read until she was 12. My middle sister, Bridget, she and I were in the same math class. When I was a freshman, she was a senior. Algebra 2, can you imagine how horrible that would be for a dyslexic person? Like, why would you ever want to take that class? And so they both graduated barely, and they hated it. And the thought of going to college was terrible. Bridget even cried. I remember our mom asking her if she wanted to go, and she was like, why would I ever want to go there? Why would I ever want to do that? And so my sister Maria graduated, did some minimum wage jobs. She got married. She had 3 kids. She got divorced. One day she calls me on the phone, and she says, oh, I'm applying at this video store. And at that point, I had gone to college. I'd spent a year volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, learning some real carpentry skills, and then I'd become a carpenter and was now helping women get into the construction industry. And I'm talking to my sister on the phone, and I'm like, why haven't I made this connection before? And so I say to her, have you ever considered a career in construction? And she says, I'm listening. She had no idea what I was talking about. 1 year later, through a lot of determination and focus, she started her first day as a first-term electrical apprentice. It's been almost 10 years, and she's now a journeyman electrical apprentice. And when you talk to her and you ask her what she does for a living, she says, I'm a journeyman electrical apprentice, and she's excited about that. If she was still working at the video store or the gas station, the pizza place, or one of the million places that she worked, she would not be happy telling me that. She made over $100,000 last year. And the reason I bring that up is this. Someone is finding value in her skills, finally. And someone is paying her what she's worth, finally. And she is finding value in herself, finally. And the other cool part is her daughter, who is now 19, recently told me, oh, I tell everyone, my mom's a badass. And I thought, if you think your mom's a badass, then maybe you think that you could possibly be a badass one day too, right? And so, we need to think about how we can bring that curiosity, that confidence, and that value to girls at a young age. So how do we do that? Well, for starters, when you're working around the house, when you get that IKEA desk or dresser or whatever it might be, you hand her an Allen wrench, right? Super easy. You're changing a light bulb. Let her screw that light bulb in. That's the easiest thing in the world, right? You're repairing your fence. Drills are the easiest things for kids to use. They're so easy, and it feels so good to them. They love it. And so there are these little things that you can involve them in right now that gets them thinking outside the box and gets them using their hands. And once they start doing that, the world opens up. The next thing you can do is engage them in the classes available to them within their own schools. You look at the classes that are offered at most schools, and girls are not enrolled in them. Those hands-on classes, woods, metals, automotive, even like FFA, those things, girls are not enrolling in those classes. And those are free classes available to them. And the sooner they start them, the more excited that they can be about their education. Third, we can support the nonprofits and other organizations that bring this work to our children, right? Whether it be science-related, wilderness training, any of those things. We support them. And finally, we look at the gifts that my parents gave us. The gift of my mom of really not having enough money and being confident that we can play with some appliances, open up a toaster and be cool with it. The gift from my dad of being a little bit mischievous and curious and using tools. And let kids know that what they're building is really cool. The process of making something is really cool. But it's the doing it, the process of doing it, that's the important part. Thank you.